So my name's David, and I'm sort of resident here in Gyan Sarovar for the last 6 years, looking after or coordinating the art department. So I was talking with Mira yesterday, and I said it'd be nice to share some experience and talk of sort of a little bit of my journey, how I've got to this point here. And she thought of the topic this morning of, I think it's the rewards of having surrendered to God. Yeah. So I'll share a little bit of experience of just, I guess, sort of when we all, you could say, become found, or the lost become found as children of Baba. We always have this feeling, or each one of us has our own personal, I guess, recognition of how that truth comes to us in different situations, and I think if we all, shared to each other our different ways how we come to Baba, we'll find that they're all totally unique and very personal and individual to each, of course, individual and unique soul. And for my own experience coming into or getting in contact with first experiencing Baba, I was sitting really like totally in the jungle, totally at a place which was like maybe close to 2,000 miles to the nearest city, in a place in a Kimberley, in the north of Western Australia. I don't know how anyone here has been to the Kimberley, northwestern Australia? No? Okay. So it's about, if you know where Perth is, on the map of Australia, well, if you go 2,000 miles north of that, that's about where I was, right up the top of Australia. And I'd finished an apprenticeship as carpentry, and I had this sort of really strong desire that I wanted to just travel around Australia like a working holiday and just enjoy myself in that sort of process of like a working holiday and working here and there, enough money to go from A to B. Anyway, I found myself up in a place called Broome, which was like, again, it's almost 1,500 miles north of Perth. And at that particular place, there was many, many people into Hatha Yoga, Rajneesh, Orange people, their meditation, and all different types of people doing, a lot of hippies as well, hippie community. So, and I found myself very attracted to this place because it had a very Asian influence to it, and even in this town, actually, the main industry for many years was pearl diving. So they dived for this pearl. And actually, it's interesting, there's a lot here from Japan, but actually that town of Broome was actually, there was a lot of Japanese divers, pearl divers there. And every year on this, on the Raki, the Raksha Bandhan full moon, they have this festival called Shinju Mashuri, which is Festival of the Pearl. And it was actually on this particular festival that you could say Baba found me, or I found Baba. And from that place I was really experienced sort of like an Asian sort of feeling, and this little town was called Little Chinatown. So they had buildings in this town, like Chinese buildings, shaped buildings, and people got around in this sarong, this lungi. And so it was quite a sort of, and very, very hot climate. But anyway, as time went on from there, I found myself, I was very interested to go right up into the Kimberley, which was like, what I'd heard of was very different terrain, and it was like, for example, Broome was like these beautiful white sandy beaches, and you didn't have to wear clothes on the beach, so people didn't wear clothes on the beach, and it was like that. Anyway, I heard that further up in this Kimberley, it was almost like the Greek islands, this sort of like quite high ridges along the coastline, and then you have little sandy beaches and a cove. And anyway, I met this particular hermit, which is like a sannyasi in Western terms. And prior to that, I was very much, I'd spent about, I think, 10 months doing meditation. I remember sitting under this mango tree, and sort of every morning and every night I'd sit for at least 1 hour, and I just was in this process of observing thoughts, just simply observing what thoughts were coming in the mind, what thoughts I was thinking about, etc. Anyway, I got such a nice experience from this, because those days for me in Australia, of course, being a bit of a hippie as well, and like sannyasi, I used to have the old chillum and stuff like this, so that was all part of the process then. But I met this particular hermit, and he was living up in this place in the Kimberley, totally isolated, like 2 days journey, 2 days boat journey to the nearest village, and you could only go to this place at least 2 or 3 times a month, when the big tide movement on the waters would actually enable you to go by boat to this place. So I found myself, not long after meeting this hermit, that I was in this place. And for me it was like, when Baba says, like, remember the days of your childhood, and that sort of feeling of when we first recognized Baba, and for me sort of it always goes back to that place, because in that next 12 months I spent on this freshwater spring, just in essence I experienced Brahma Baba there, I experienced Shiv Baba there, this thing of surrendering to truth, to God, and what I wanted to, my own specialties, what I wanted to use within that as well. And all these things sort of like almost were fulfilled within that 1 year, the whole aim and object of what I wanted to do. So as time went on, I found the first 3 months in this place was like, it was so isolated and so remote. Once a day I'd see this surveillance plane, this coastal surveillance would fly past the coastline, and they were looking for Indonesian boats, because this point in Australia was the closest point to Indonesia, to Bali and there. So quite often overnight these Balinese boats would come in, and they're hunting for this, I think, abalone shell. They would dive in the Australian waters, and of course that was illegal, so this coastal surveillance was always checking for these boats, and they'd hide themselves in the mangroves and all sorts of stuff. But anyway, sort of that was the only engine and only sound alien to the nature I was in that I'd hear there. And after about sort of 3 months I thought, wow, like how much influence of society and how much influence of the systems, customs and systems of this world had on me. Because it was like, if I wanted to sit by the freshwater spring all day, after that period of time it was fine. It was not like I should be doing this or I shouldn't be doing that, or you can't just, sit down and just enjoy just being. There was always this sort of thought prior to that you had to be doing something, or, like in society, you go to work and all these things are set up. But it was like just a feeling of, I guess, getting in tune with myself of what I really needed to do for where I was living. And of course it would become very, very simple. It was like sometimes a day's activity was like collecting the firewood just to cook dinner at night, or getting water from the spring, or like growing some vegetables, or like a little bit of gardening work. But it became very, very, very simple. And in that process I thought, wow, how much I was influenced by society outside of that. You should, because at that time friends of mine were getting relationships and getting married and buying properties and all this sort of thing, and I was sort of like feeling somehow I didn't feel I wanted to get sort of, I'd never bought anything on credit. I'd never had I thought if I had the cash to buy something, I would buy it. Otherwise I didn't want the feeling that if I wanted to go A to B, that I had this sort of somehow some bondage that wouldn't enable me to do that. So in this after this 3 months it was, and of course what happened there too, because I'd been doing carpentry, I'd always had this desire that I wanted to build a house out of just natural materials, out of logs from the forest or trees from the forest. So I was there, and this particular area was a cyclone area in the north of Australia. They have cyclones in the monsoon. And not long after I was there, I think it was about 4 months, it was coming into Christmas and January, so that was a monsoon time. And this cyclone had come past and about 100 kilometers away, but had sort of blown over a lot of these trees in this forest. And I found this place off the side of the cliff. There's all little valleys in this area, and I ended up building this like log platform out from the cliff. And to enter this house, you had to climb up the rocks, and you had to enter through the floor of this house. You come up from the floor itself. And this place was like really just like a 4-meter triangle coming out from the cliff. And I had a little fireplace which was in the rock face of this rock face of the rocks. And that was like one real desire, really. I wanted to build this place, and I think it was in 7 days I ended up building this house. It was, I think, 7 days before a new moon, and I thought I had this aim. I wanted to build this house before the new moon, and it was done before the new moon. And what was interesting, there was 2 other people in this place apart from this hermit who had been there for many, many years. And if you can imagine, this hermit, one time he said he was there for 2 years in this place, and he didn't see one person in 2 years. And when somebody did eventually come to this place, he had to actually touch them and to see whether they're actually real or not. So it was really like that. So all the stories this hermit had, like, absolutely fascinating, because he's sort of like, he'd been living alone there. He'd had his own meditation, and I'd tried this meditation, which I ended up twice. I think I experienced what he'd experienced, or the process of that meditation. But what was very interesting, I think it was probably after about 6 months and probably about 2 months after I had finished building this little house. And in those days, I think myself, I was really like the sannyasi, so I had long hair then. I hadn't had a haircut for about 8 years, long beard, no clothes, wearing no clothes, no shoes for 1 year, like that. And in that process, it was like, I remember sort of going through because I found when there was no influence, and somehow transcribing this now to where we are at this point, as far as we're practicing Raj Yoga and we're following the things, and we have our Amrit Vela, that time of silence where we have a chance to go into this space. Well, and it's like when you come here to Gyan Sarovar, to Madhaban, there's a certain silence here which maybe you feel, wow, this is more special than even where I live in whichever country we live in. And even the silence and the atmosphere, vibration, it's all has an influence on how we actually perceive that truth within silence. And of course, when there's the more silence, it's almost like the reflection of my own thoughts, and how what I'm doing becomes more amplified or more real to what's going on. So when there's no external stimuli, as far as in advertising what people are saying and all the ideas, and because everyone has a different idea, a different opinion, and of course when we're not really in which we've come into Raj Yoga to become Raja, or self-sovereign, or masters. So we're in that process. So when we're influenced by this, of course, we look for ways in our own journey where I can get that silence, what space I need for myself to experience. And for me, it's that I went through this thing where even with food, with what food I was having in this place, it was like, I remember I just had this little wooden bowl, and I remember I used to grow these pumpkins and sort of beans and that, and of course, when you're in that sort of place, everything that was brought there by boat was so treasured. So, your milk powder, your grains, some dried fruit, some, like these items that bring in a boat, and I was so, like, you think, wow, this is what I have, and I can ration this out to maybe 2 months, 3 months, or whatever, and, have one piece of this per day, or something every 2 days. So you become very, very disciplined in what I had and knowing how long that would last. But what had happened when I was going through this thing with food, it was like I found that I just have 2 little bowls of food a day, and I got so much into this sort of what I needed, what I really needed to survive and to live where I was. And it was like if I had one mouthful, just one mouthful more than what I needed, I would get some sort of pinprick or some subtle little sign indicating that that was greed, or that was just for taste. It wasn't actually what you needed. And this went on for some time, and of course the feeling within this also was so much love, and so much sort of, this thing was coming to me like if I surrendered to this truth, which I felt at that point was within silence, that everything would be taken care of, like a real loveful experience in this state. And so this went on, and not long after this experience, I was all of a sudden inspired to paint something. Now, I hadn't really painted before that. And I remember the first picture I painted was this picture shaped like the Taj Mahal. It was like this, and I'd made it sort of, it was a little piece of plywood, and the hermit who'd been living there, he had these little small little tins of enamel paint and this piece of plywood, so, and these brushes. So I'd set up, and some reason I was inspired to paint this temple. So it was like the Taj Mahal shape with these 5 archways, 5 doorways. And this temple was a golden color, like this bag here, this golden yellow color. And it was in a cloud and in a space background with stars and planets and shooting star. And what I'd done, I'd put these, out of these 5 doorways, I'd put these 5 rainbow colors that come to this point of light, this star, which was in space, suspended in space. And when I'd finished this, I just had this little handrail on this platform, this log platform. And when I was looking at this picture, all of a sudden I could see in the middle of this temple was this person sitting in meditation. And it was so clear, this image, it was like somebody sitting there had white hair, white moustache, sitting in his half lotus position. And the same thing again was coming, this thing of so much silence, and this thing of, in my mind was like, if to surrender to this truth or this silence again, that everything would be taken care of. And then this person in the middle of this temple, like I felt, wow, whoever this is, it's, I mean, very, very special, or something was happening very special. And just prior to that, I'd read this book, maybe some here have read that, of Paramahansa Yogananda, the autobiography of a yogi, Vivekananda. Yeah. So lovely stories in this book of these sadhus and saints, and it had actually many black and white photos in this book of the different, some that just lived off air, some that did this, and some that walked up ropes, and all sorts of different city powers and that these people had. And I was fascinated because this was the first that I'd heard of, you know, anything from India really, and all these different, you know, powers we can attain through meditation and tapasya and all this. So I'd gone down to this hermit's house, and I got this book, and I come back up, and I was seeing if any of these photos were matching the person in the middle of this temple. And of course none were there. Of course it was Brahma Baba, but I didn't know that then. It was just like it was 2 years, almost 2 years later I come across Gyan. But anyway, this feeling, this thing of surrender, and this whole thing of somehow I really went into this, that it was in silence, because I had no real belief of God or anything like in a religion sense. It was more, I felt there was some intelligence or some being, but it wasn't sort of a human form or whatever. So of course that picture became very special. It was almost like, it's one of those things, if you painted a wall with some colours, and all of a sudden you stand back and you realise you just painted a horse, but actually you just painted the wall, the shape or the brush marks and like that. So it was sort of one of those things you can't really explain how it happened. It just happened. And then it wasn't long after that, it was on the full moon, and this was adding to that. It was like and literally my house, I had a door as a bed. The furniture in the house was a door, which was a bed with a little piece of foam on it, and I had a wok, a saucepan, and a little Swiss Army knife. That was my kitchen. And I think a teapot I had there, orange teapot. And this thing of, I remember sort of even going through the monsoon, it was like, somehow, for me it got back to just that such simplicity of lifestyle, of just like, and almost like, I mean now, of course, later on when I came to India, of course, first time setting foot in India and I seen the sannyasi, I thought, wow, the sannyasi sanskar, well, definitely I've sort of been here before in India, you know, in the sannyasi, because that's how I was living there. It was very much like the sannyasi. And of course, and feeling that I had everything as well, like totally everything I needed was there. And of course this feeling of surrendering to this space. And then not long after that, with this full moon, I remember, and actually this place was under a banyan tree, which I didn't also know what a banyan tree was till I come in Gyan, but actually I'd built under this banyan tree, and all the roots of the tree come down the rock face into the house, so it was quite sort of special. But on this one full moon, I remember staring across at this valley, and this valley, all this place is broken down rock in the Kimberley. And that actually even up until that point in 1982 I was there, even parts of the Kimberley were still uncharted. So still people, white or Aboriginal may have been in it, but white man still hadn't been into certain parts. It was that remote. You could go, I mean, of course, helicopter, but it was so rugged and all rocks that even you can't drive in. You could maybe come in by maybe donkey or goat that's good on the rocks and all that, but of course there was nothing up there, and very, very hot climate, so really sort of no man's land type of thing. And of course travelling, you could only travel, and people would only go into the areas in the monsoon where there was rain, because pockets of rainwater would be certain places so you could actually get your water. Otherwise, where I was living was like one of, I think, 3 places in maybe 600 kilometers of coastline, which actually the fresh water run into the ocean. So we had this beautiful freshwater spring there, and rock pool, and the environment, of course, was like paradise setting. So coming back to this full moon, when this full moon was, I was looking at this, staring at this one rock on the other side of the valley, and I remember as I was staring at this rock, I was thinking, out of all these rocks, this one rock was like glowing, like it was almost a light, right at eye level. And then I was inspired, I pulled back to the roof of the house, which was this tarpaulin, like this canvas tarpaulin, and I could just see like the vision of the moon above my head, and I was staring at this rock, and I just had this experience of myself as light. And I remember I got so inspired by this experience. The next day I went down this valley, and I had these 2 little tins of paint, and I went up to paint this rock. And I ended up painting this rock as a target. And I'm not sure now whether it's a red center and a blue ring, or a blue center and a red ring around it, but it was this target sign. And that became my meditation. I used to sit on this rock in the house, and I used to stare at this rock, and I used to imagine myself as this image of light. And I think this then went on for about maybe 3 more months, and then it was coming up to nearly 12 months I was at this place. And then I had the very, very clear feeling that now I have to do this amongst people. It was like a real feeling that it was as great in isolation and in this place and these experiences, but now I have to be amongst people and experience that. So after a big effort to sort of leave a bit, it was like leaving, coming back to this village, and then driving down to Broome again. And once I got to Broome, I had these friends there that sort of, he was like a bit like a sannyasi as well. He was like a hatha yoga teacher. So he'd got work on this property outside of Broome. Interesting enough, this place was like about 15 kilometers outside of Broome on a very, very rough road, right on the ocean. And he'd got me this job doing this sun deck, building a sun deck on this log cabin for this lady who was very, very, very well known in the Kimberley for growing gardens and tropical gardens in a like a desert sort of environment. And so I ended up doing this sun deck on this house, and the lady said, I can either pay you for this job, or if you like to build a little place on the property, you're welcome to do that. So of course I decided to build a little place on the property. And from the Kimberley, when I come back to here, I was very inspired to paint, like to airbrush, because I had one of these transit vans. You probably know the transit van, like a mobile home. So I'd fitted out this vehicle. I had everything in the vehicle. I had bed, kitchen, stove, sink, TV, stereo, boat, trailer, surfboard, all my tools, a big tent. So I had this sort of mobile sort of home and setup. So when I'd always had this desire that I wanted to do one of these murals on the side of this van, like a sunset and ocean and like something fancy with the airbrush. So when I come back from the Kimberley, I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to teach myself this airbrush. And funny enough, when I decided this and I went into the Social Security office in Broome and said, listen, I'm staying 15 kilometres out of town and I'm actually not that interested in coming in looking for work. I want to teach myself this airbrush. Can I still get unemployment benefits for that? And funny enough, the brother I was speaking to was a Brahmin. I didn't know that then. I hadn't come across right. And he said, yeah, sure. So as easy as that, so I used to come in every fortnight from this place and, a bit of puja to this doll office and collect my check, a couple of $100 I think it was in those days for a fortnight. And so I had a book and I was studying this airbrush and I was painting many pictures with this point of light, this big star in every picture, just little pictures. And I used to pump up these old fire hydrant cylinders, the old sort of, used to put out the fire with, you turn upside down and you got a hose and you sort of, I don't know whether you know those, the hydrant. I sort of put a valve on that. I used to pump up by hand the air pressure and I used to use the airbrush sort of. And in that period of time, I remember, so it was in I think a week before the full moon in August, the Raksha Bandhan full moon, Rakhi full moon, and this Brahmin had come up to this town from Perth, and every year he'd come up just before this festival, and he'd look for a property to stay on, and he'd stay for 3 or 4 months in the winter season. Well, he'd come across this property where I was staying, and the lady said, oh, you go and see David over here who's doing some paintings. Well, of course, really the sannyasi sanskar was there, because even in that place I didn't wear clothes. So if I hear anyone coming, I'd put on a sarong at least. And so I heard somebody coming through the bush, so I put on a sarong, and this brother comes, and as soon as he come into this camp, he saw what I was painting, which was this big star on the edge of this painting. He said, you know what you're painting? And I said, it's a star. And he said, this is a soul and supreme soul. And he was so enthusiastic, this Brahmin. He said, like, of course, finding a Brahmin there, or finding myself there and sort of painting all these pictures of light. And then, of course, he started talking about soul and supreme soul. And he says, and then I started sharing my experience from a year and a half before that in the Kimberley, where I'd had this experience of myself as light and this thing of surrender and all this. So all of a sudden what I was getting was like, he left this correspondence book, and it's like, as I'm reading through these experiences I'd had sort of a year and a half before, but of course now it was all in black and white. And it was interesting enough, because he said to me, he was very honest Brahmin, he'd actually come up there to grow a bit of dope, a bit of marijuana, sort of. So he actually said to me, now don't take me as a good example as a Brahmin, I'm only a half-caste Brahmin. So my first 2 lessons was sitting around this campfire, putting these papers together with a chillum, So lesson 1 and 2 was like that. So not your standard sort of introduction to Raj Yoga, but so as time went on, it was like, then it was almost like what I had experienced in that isolation was like slowly each lesson sort of I was understanding, wow, how I was actually being invoked and pulled to Baba from that place of isolation and these experiences of surrender and this whole thing of, like, I remember I started also playing music from this place in the Kimberley, like right out in the jungle, and I had this really, I guess, very deep thought of this thing of that I wanted to use these things to also experience silence, and actually to bring others into that space of silence. And And of course, as time's gone on, it's sort of like that's, I mean, with artwork, I think from that day one or coming into Gyan of painting pictures of Shiv Baba, I mean, it must be hundreds and, I mean, I don't know, maybe even 1,000 of them now or something painted over since 1984. And, you know, it's like interesting enough because it's like sometimes, you know, when we do things as far as in service and surrender as far as surrender in the sense of doing what firstly we really need to do for ourselves. And then of course if we're happy within that, like when Baba sort of gives us the example of, you know, if we're, you know, if real service is done and when we're actually doing what we really enjoy to do within service, not something we're doing out of, or if I don't do what others going to say, or, you know, doing it under a fear base, or feeling that I'm expected to do this, or whatever, but just doing really from the heart. And I found that sort of coming into, of course, being very enthusiastic of painting points of light, and I think about 1994, I think was the first time the idea came of actually painting Brahma Baba and Shiv Baba in the same painting. And I remember in New York I was involved with another brother from Australia doing a museum there, this laser show, because I actually had 5 years of travelling different countries doing these laser shows. And one was in New York and Holland, Naki Lake here, the museum. I forget, it was Barcelona, there's one in Den Haag. But in that time, it was like, in New York, was like this feeling, why not have, like this picture here, instead of the casket and Brahma Baba as in two pieces, put Shiv Baba and Brahma Baba in the same picture and just half pose, or head and shoulder, because I was thinking, well, main thing is the dristi and sort of. So that started from that point, and of course I remember coming to Madhaban, well, it must have been not long after that, and I must have had like 50 or 100 photos of a painting I'd painted, and sort of I was so excited about this picture, and if I look at the picture now, it looks really spooky because it's like the eyes are really not really accurate. It was like the first one, but it was like a new concept. And I remember after that, it was like, I guess sort of the same thing within what we're doing as far as, for me, the painting Brahma Baba was like, I remember painting Brahma Baba with having a photo and using a projector, and then seeing what I was painting. I used to always look at the photo and think, wow, here's a photo exactly as it is, and here's what I've painted, which has been projected, so the outline is the same, everything, but there'd always be so much difference. And I used to think, why is it if I have something here that you're looking at, and all you're doing is just like colouring in, why is there such a difference? You know, I mean, if you see the picture, then it's just a matter of copying. But then after about 3 or 4 or 5 of these, doing these paintings, I used to look at them and think, well, it's a little bit like this, and it's not really like the same as that. And then I guess it got to a point where I guess those who are in arts or in the arts and in this sort of creative side of things, when we really start to see something and see something as it is, it's like that's the point then when we actually start to be able to copy that or capture something else about something which, you know, gives some life to something, or you know, reality to something. And I remember sort of getting the photo and thinking, wow, looking at that and look what I was painting, and I'd find that I was putting, you know, light where it should be dark and dark where it should be light, and actually I wasn't really seeing that image as it was. And then I got into this really study of the photo, thinking, well, where's the darkest spot on Brahma Baba's face, and where's the next darkest, and the next and the next and the lightest spot, and going so much into the detail that then really starting to sort of make sure that what I was painting had the same thing. And then of course it started to become real. It means in a sense all of a sudden it's like it started looking similar to the photo or more real to the photo, and the eyes and all this. And then I sort of went into this space of realizing, wow, you know, the old artists, or if we go back in time where there's no photographs, where the artist would go out into the field and look at the scenery and maybe go out there every day at the same time, so you get the right shadows at the same time and whatever, and they would paint the painting, and of course the artist, which could really see what he was looking at, would actually capture that realism, and of course then the end of that painting would really look like, wow, this looks like a photograph, or it looks so realistic and so real. So I'd had that experience doing Brahma Baba, and of course the more getting into detail, the more refined, and I thought, and even that becomes a meditation in itself, of that concentration and so much into detail. And then of course many orders of pictures. I think even this stage now there's still about 60 or 70 on a backlist, which actually at this point I haven't actually done any airbrush painting for about 6 months. Actually been more playing music and going through a change in creative side of, because music for me was like also a thing from this Kimberley, was this thing of surrender. With that I felt I wanted to use music and artwork to capture that experience, or to create that experience. And I guess it was in 1987 I had a meeting with, when we had personal meetings with Baba in those days, and he said all about, just as you attained all attainments from the Father, keep singing songs of attainments. He said, you sing songs, don't you? And I said, yes. He said, well, keep singing songs of attainments. And I've just felt that last years I've done that, but I haven't really sort of done it that much for the family as far as being out there doing that. So that's been sort of going more into creating acts through live music. So the thing with surrender, it's like I guess when Baba says, when we first come along, and he said, you've been searching me for how many lives since Copper Age? Everyone here feels like they've been searching since Copper Age? No one. The one. So it's really that feeling when we really have that experience that, wow, what I've been looking for, that I've found, and to use whatever we have within that process and that cause. It's like, of course the returns are there, and I think from my own experience within that, like everything up to this present point of like how I come to Madhaban, coming to Madhaban was like, okay, my first trip to Madhaban was 86, but then from that first trip, coming here with the airbrush and just doing something here, as far as I did a little painting with the airbrush, and then the artists here, they saw that and they thought, wow, to blend all the colours like that, was maybe a bit more complicated with enamel paints. And in those days in Madhaban, they didn't paint on canvas like this. It was all on plywood, 6 feet by 4 feet plywood. And if it was bigger, then they'd join it. So, sometimes Baba says, don't worry about the joins. Well, if you can make a one-piece canvas, why have the joins, The picture in Harmony Hall up here, I think, has one join. It's 2 pieces of canvas, which you don't see from a distance. But it was almost like then it started to come into, okay, to do something on canvas and to do something with acrylic colours, so you don't get the shine or the glossy reflection. So, of course, it was all coming into that line where you could create something where it'd maybe give more feeling, or you could light it at a certain point where you really could capture sort of a depth of something. And of course we know it's sort of not the painting, and we know it's not the image, but it's what something may touch the soul. It might be some music, it might be a commentary, whatever, but whatever it takes to get to that point of silence and concentration, then if we use a painting or music or whatever it may be, that's to our advantage. Otherwise, my own experience with this was like, sometimes painting a lot of these pictures, if I'd sit in meditation, for me, if I looked at the picture, I'd be thinking for, I used to think one point, like half the meditation or more of the meditation was thinking, oh, Brahma Baba's eye is a little bit like this, and it could be a little bit more like this and this. And my yoga would be sort of looking what I could change on the next painting or correction on that painting. And then in the end, I'd have to look at a little spot on the floor or something, a little bit of chrome reflection on a chair, and that'd be my translate and my focus. Otherwise, I'd sort of get caught in, because you think, oh, I've done this, or that whole concept that I've done this, And then of course you get caught in that sort of, your own creation, and rather than going beyond, maybe somebody else has the experience of going beyond, and it's different for others than yourself when you've done something. As we know, when we do something, if we're totally detached and totally egoless, then it's like you've just done it, and it's like Bubba's done it, and bus, full stop. But if we're caught in it, then we think, we get sort of caught in the creation. So coming here was like slowly showing some of the artists here how to use airbrush, and then some were inspired with that, and then I stayed 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and then sort of each time was like staying more and more and more, and of course being sort of having the sanskaras and the thing of this sannyasi background and hermit background. Of course, coming to India is like, majority of the population is like out camping compared to in Australia. It's like when we go out camping, we take the tent or something and a little gas stove and this and this and this. And then when I come to India, I thought, wow, majority of the village life is like very simple like this anyway. The cows and sort of getting the water from the well and all these things which I felt very, very comfortable with in the Kimberley, going down to the spring, getting the water, and so simplicity. So coming here was it was all of a sudden, like this population, and interesting enough, the last months I very much had a very deep experience of this thing of, I guess when we really feel somewhere to be home, what we say when we have the concept of, Baba says this is our home, Madhaban. Everyone here feel like it's home? Yeah? Not sure? Yes? Paramdham, of course, is our home, but corporeal-wise, Madhaban being the center place of like, okay, Baba was here and his experiences here, but it's just like the feeling of for a while there I thought, wow, I was doing artwork and very much involved in the artwork. Sometimes the last years here would be like from 5 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock at night in the art department here, and we started all this digital work, computers and a digital printing, so it slowly went from airbrush to all this digital stuff, so it means the output and that was become, tripled and doubled, and the whole rest of it. I thought it'd become least work getting the printer and all this digital side, but actually become 10 times more or whatever more. I was under a total illusion that it'd be actually I have more time for painting. But that was a process also of even within that process of being so much involved, and when we say we all have our challenges and sort of, like where we are in our service places, our service companions and all this, all the challenges I've had here within Gyan Sarovar on that level, because it was like, firstly it was like, for all this time I'd always worked alone. When you're painting as an artist, no one's stretching my canvases for me. I'd make the frame, stretch the canvas, paint the picture and set it up, put the lighting, everything. So it was like, but then actually looking after, Daddy had asked me to look after art department, and all of a sudden, all the things I avoided, like the things of accounting, the things of working with others, doing the books and ordering materials and dealing on a counter with people, and of course people coming in not knowing what they want, and you have to go through the whole process. So of course all the things of relating and dealing with others was all there. So of course in the beginning it was like all the trials of getting a system, accounting system and all this, but even then after a few years it was a thing of also thinking, okay, my expectation of what I would think should go out from art department or go out from, the quality and the sort of thing, and then trying to control that. So all these things of letting go of control and thinking if somebody likes it like this, and if the other artists, if they'll work to a certain level to their own capacity and maybe not as refined or whatever as my own sort of style and way I do things, but then even letting go of that, thinking, okay, if people like it, then that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect or whatever. So it was almost like this thing also of letting even go of that, thinking, okay. And of course I found myself when I even surrendered to that aspect, that sort of then almost like then I had more time for myself again here, and also as far as with music and creating through that, and the time to do that. Because I always used to feel I'd do sometimes some music here, but it was always like rushing A to B to do something outside of where I was, and it was, of course, a bondage almost to where I was, not letting go of this and sort of handing delegation and all these things. So, and of course on the overall side of all that, it's like doing, when we do something really from the heart, and when we're surrendered in that sense to Baba, and surrender, I think when we all think of surrender in a true sense, I mean, what is surrender in the ultimate sense? And of course it's with the mind, totally connected to Baba, connected into that silence, into really our home base, so to speak, totally within silence as the observer, detached observer, seeing the drama, what's happening in front of me, 100% what it is at that moment. Not even a single thought that something should be another way than what it is. And for me, that was like coming more into this thing of, wow, for me, that's what surrender is, to sort of be totally in that awareness at every moment that what's happening is 100% accurate for this time. And as soon as I found myself going into questions of why, and even subtly thinking that somebody should be doing something a different way than what they're doing it, of course then conflict would start. Somehow there's a certain amount of peacelessness that would come in through that, even just the thoughts on that. So the more and more I've been sort of feeling that thing of surrender is really like, like Baba I think said the other day or yesterday in the Avyak Murli, that if we really realize that at this point now, this has happened for eternity like it is now. It's never been any different. Never at this moment. And never will be. So to accept that aspect, and not just at moments, but in all the journey, like from A to B, to be aware of that, what's happening, of course, that is surrendering in a sense to that truth and that silence. And as Baba says, nothing new. We've done it. We've been that before. We actually have been there. And of course then that comes in another level of where to sustain that awareness and to keep that awareness of what is really that truth. And of course for me, the experience within that has been then the soul gets the experience what it needs to do for itself, and its best way of the thing of service, of how we reveal Baba. Of course, it almost means then that, for me it was like the experience that only then when I sit in silence, and that depth of silence in the moment, and as the observer, that then I actually have my choice, what I would like to do for Baba in that space. Each one's specialty, each one's own way, it knows in its heart how it likes to reveal Baba, and within its own specialty. And of course, that's all the journey we're on now, is to get back to that space. Each one like to experience that and think, okay, how can I sustain that? And we have all methods here, like, we have a day of silence or this or that, and I think those of us who sort of experience and go into that, we find it always somehow when we go beyond sound and sort of into that silence, somehow we get inspired in certain ways and certain levels of what we like to do for Baba within that space. Does that make sense? So, anyone like to ask anything, or any question, or anything? Everyone's content. Santushmani. Because surrender in the sense of, physically surrendering. I remember in Australia, I think I was one of the first brothers in Australia to technically surrender as such. I remember it was in 1989, and I think Charlie then was sort of like surrendered as such, but he had sort of some, support from his family, Lockett family. And I remember I was asked to come to Indraprastha, the main centre in Sydney, to help renovate the centre. And interestingly enough, in those times, it was like there was no real system like they have here in India, in Madhaban, of course. Surrendered brothers here, they're given the clothes. Every year they issued all the cloth for Gurda pajamas and socks and towels, and all this sort of thing is all over a period of time is given, jacket for winter and whatever, that looked after. But in Australia it was like there's no real system like that. It was like, and I remember sort of even the faith within surrendering and how Baba really looks after us. It was like, I remember sort of going to Indraprastha, and I had a vehicle then, and I was running that myself, my own finances of petrol and running around, and it was like I just had such a intoxication. I was asked to, centre to help renovate it, and just the feeling of being there and just doing things for Baba. I remember sort of it ended up sort of this all-round part. I wasn't just doing carpentry, it was sort of like cooking, and then some classes and courses and airport runs, picking up people from the airport, taking international guests for a tour around Sydney, and all this. It become this sort of full part of just being, I guess, ever ready and sort of and Haji to do anything. And for me, I loved that. It was like, nothing was fixed as a sense. You could just go from this to that, whatever was needed. But I found that sort of how things unfolded was like, I remember one sister come to me, and this one sister was asked to surrender. Dr. Nirma had asked his sister, how'd you like to surrender and do full-time work in the office? And I remember she came to me, and because she saw me that I'd been here a couple of years then in Indraprastha, and she wanted to know, what's the story, what does the Yagya look after you? What happens if you get sick? They pay this, and what about dentist, and what about... She had like a dozen questions, and I sort of like, I was thinking, I didn't think of any of that. It was just like, I was asked and I just went. I was so inspired and intoxicated, I just went to Indraprastha, and of course arrived with my car with all the tools and everything. And it was interesting because I found that in that period of time, like, I remember sort of my car got stolen. And it got stolen for, like, I watched it out of the bedroom window getting driven away. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I thought, it's too bit gross to yell out in the middle of the night. So I just let them drive away with this car. And I think it was nearly 4 months later I got this car back, and right on that day I got the car back, I was actually thinking of getting a loan to buy another car, getting a few $1,000s, which was interesting. And that day the police rang me and said, we've found your car. It's under this, it's about 2 suburbs away, and this car, you didn't need a key to start it, so that was half the problem. And the doors didn't lock, so somebody just got in the car and just sort of started it and drove off. So I went to this car. It was under this tree and it was covered in leaves, and I just sort of pumped the accelerator a few times and it started up, and I drove it home. And funny enough, this is a thing of service as well with this car. I had 2 little signs on the back windows of the car of meditation, and a meditation, free meditation, and a phone number. And somebody across the road had read this sign and done the course from the car parked under this tree. And then from the course, somehow it got back to me that, sort of this car, somebody with Raj Yoga on the side of it, sitting out front of my place for the last 2 or 3 months. So I got the car back. But it was like, the thing is with petrol and then all of a sudden this car was like really quite unroadworthy, and sort of then they thought, it's best you have another car. So then all of a sudden this new car was given to me, this sort of truck, and then all the petrol was paid for, registration, and I found that always along the process that whatever I needed would actually be provided. Baba would give in some way or another, like just at a point Dr. Nirma would say, how are you off for money? Do you need this? Do you need that? Or someone would donate something, some shoes or clothes or whatever. So without asking, and it almost something within that thing of surrender, it would come along in its own time. And of course all this I used to then reflect back to the Kimberley This was like in 1982 where I had that feeling, if I surrendered to this truth, this silence, that then everything would be taken care of. And of course, that's how it's been along the way. It's like really been that, and I feel just when we do things out of that space and our service and whatever, that the blessings and whatever back from that, that also moves us forward. And in whatever challenges, whatever test papers we have, of course, the soul is easy able to go through those. You know, it's like it still has the blessings from the family, and of course we're all from one day to another is different. So nothing's fixed in that process. So it's been a nice journey of that thing of surrendering and sort of, and you know, when I guess it's when Baba, you know, says that, you know, for so many lives we've been searching, and now Baba's come along and we recognize that, and then how much we recognize that, and to that percentage is how much we actually really surrender in the sense of the mind to that truth within that, silence, and just to be in that complete soul conscious state. And I guess sort of for me it's like, you know, when the different analogies of what it is to be soul consciousness, you know, I mean, all the things are included, but for me it was very much that thing of just totally being the observer. I remember sort of in Australia, the Australian Aboriginal, I don't know whether anyone here knows that much about the Australian Aboriginal and their particular law, they call it LORE. They very much see themselves as they draw a circle on the ground or something, and they draw a point in the middle of this circle, and they see themselves as this center point, as the observer, and whatever's happening, what the eyes are seeing is like the game. And as long as we're centered in that center point as the observer, then we get shown where everything is. And within their law, I remember sort of being in the Kimberley and sort of and experiencing that when they sit in this space, you know, the Aboriginal, they don't have anything with them. When they're totally nomads, so they don't build any real houses, they just wander. The traditional Aboriginal would just wander in the country, and they'd find food where they are, and they maybe build a little thing out of twigs or, you know, branches and all that just overnight, but basically no structure. And they would actually get shown where food was, where water was, just by simply being the observer. And you imagine in nature like that, where we're just totally in that space with nature, of course, you get shown where all these things are, where water is. Maybe you have the thought, and then the bird flies this way or this way, and you follow that, you connect that thought with how nature is moving, and actually that's how the process works in their law. So I'd experienced that in Kimberley. It was really like being that observer and just thinking, wow, all these things are actually shown to us when we're simply in the present moment, not thinking of past and not worried about future, but just simply being the observer in silence. So they were all sort of connected with that, and I remember when I came first time here to Maraban, and another thing, the Aboriginal, they see a lot of things with faces in the trees, and you know, like you see these fairy tales, and they draw the trees with a face and the rocks. Well, actually they see things like that, and it's all still connected with being the observer and following that. Om Shanti.